In the heart of the Cascade Mountains, where towering pines pierced the sky and the air was crisp with the scent of earth and wood, lay a forgotten cabin. It was a remnant of a bygone era, shrouded in legends and whispers of those who had ventured too close. Few spoke of it, and even fewer dared to seek it out, for the tales woven around the lost cabin were tinged with both allure and dread. Clara Mitchell, an adventurous spirit with a love for the outdoors, had heard about the cabin during her many hikes. It was said to be hidden deep within the woods, accessible only to those willing to brave the underbrush and the secrets it held. Intrigued by the stories, Clara decided it was time to embark on an adventure of her own. She spent weeks preparing, poring over maps and scouring online forums for any scrap of information about the cabin's location. The more she learned, the more determined she became. The idea of unearthing a piece of history, combined with the thrill of the unknown, ignited a fire in her heart. With a sturdy backpack filled with essentials, Clara set out on a cool autumn morning, the sun filtering through the leaves as she hiked deeper into the wilderness. The path soon grew overgrown, and the forest closed in around her, a tapestry of greens and browns illuminated by shafts of golden light. Clara reveled in the beauty of her surroundings, feeling a sense of freedom that only nature could provide. She followed the vague directions she had pieced together, her intuition guiding her as she navigated the twists and turns of the rugged terrain. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Clara's excitement grew. She stumbled upon a clearing, her breath catching in her throat as she finally saw it. The lost cabin. Nestled against a backdrop of towering trees, the cabin stood half hidden, its weathered wood blending seamlessly with the natural world around it. Vines climbed the sides and the roof sagged, a testament to years of neglect. Despite its dilapidated state, the cabin exuded a charm that made Clara's heart race. It was a place where stories had been lived and lost, where memories lingered in the air. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing against the rough wood of the doorframe. The door creaked open with a gentle push, revealing a dim interior filled with shadows. The musty smell of old wood and decay filled her nostrils as Clara stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the filtered light that streamed through grimy windows, and she felt as though she had entered a different time. The cabin was sparsely furnished with a few pieces of furniture scattered haphazardly. A wooden table, a worn-out armchair, and a bed frame stripped of its mattress. Each item seemed to whisper secrets of its past, begging to be remembered. As Clara explored, she discovered remnants of what life might have been like in the cabin. An old photograph framed on the wall, faded but still evocative. A half-burnt candle on the table, and a collection of weathered books on a shelf. She picked up one of the books, its cover cracked and pages yellowed. It was a journal, the writing scrawled and uneven, chronicling the life of someone who had once called this place home. The entries were filled with mundane details of daily life, but as Clara read on, she began to notice a change in tone. The writer's thoughts became increasingly erratic, filled with fears of unseen forces and ominous shadows that crept into the corners of the cabin. Clara's pulse quickened as she absorbed the chilling accounts of nights filled with whispers and rustling noises that kept the writer awake, paralyzed with fear. Determined to uncover more, Clara delved deeper into the cabin, her curiosity overshadowing the unease that began to gnaw at her. She climbed the rickety staircase to the loft, where a small window revealed a breathtaking view of the forest. But there was something else, a sense of being watched, an intangible presence that made the hair on her arms stand on end. In the loft, she found a small trunk tucked away beneath the floorboards. Its lock was rusted, but Clara managed to pry it open with a crowbar she had brought along. Inside, she discovered a collection of strange artifacts, talismans made of bone, bundles of herbs, and a small wooden idol carved with grotesque features. A sense of foreboding washed over her as she held the idol in her hands, its eyes seeming to glimmer with a life of their own. Clara placed the idol back in the trunk, feeling a deep unease settle in her stomach. The stories she had heard began to replay in her mind, warnings about those who had come before her, those who had sought the cabin but never returned. She decided it was time to leave, to distance herself from the unsettling energy that had begun to envelop her. As she descended the stairs, a cold gust of wind blew through the cabin, sending a shiver down her spine. The door slammed shut behind her, as if refusing to let her escape. Clara's heart raced, panic creeping in as she pushed against the door, but it wouldn't budge. The cabin felt alive, as if it were holding her captive. In the fading light, she looked for another way out, her breath quickening. She noticed a narrow window in the back of the cabin, barely large enough for her to squeeze through. With desperation fueling her, Clara climbed onto a table, pushing against the frame to get a better look. She could see the forest beyond, and relief washed over her. All she needed to do was crawl through and escape. Just as she was about to make her move, a shadow flickered across the wall. Clara froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The shadow grew larger, morphing into a figure, an indistinct shape that loomed in the corner, its presence both captivating and terrifying. Clara's instincts screamed at her to flee, but her body betrayed her, rooted to the spot as fear gripped her. Suddenly, the figure lunged toward her, and in a moment of pure adrenaline, she flung herself at the window. She squeezed through the opening, feeling the rough edges scrape against her skin as she tumbled to the ground outside. She landed hard on the forest floor, gasping for breath and scrambling to her feet. The cabin loomed behind her, dark and foreboding, but she didn't look back. She ran. The forest enveloped her in a cacophony of sounds, the rustling leaves and snapping twigs accompanying her frantic escape. She darted through the trees, the fading daylight casting eerie shadows that seemed to reach for her. Clara's thoughts raced as she retraced her steps, desperate to put distance between herself and the cabin. The unease that had settled in her gut now twisted into raw panic. As she emerged from the tree line, she stumbled upon a familiar path, relief flooding her senses. She followed the trail, her pace quickening, the whispers of the woods receding as she neared the main road. The sun dipped below the horizon, and darkness began to cloak the world around her. But she pressed on, driven by the need to escape the cabin's grasp. Eventually, Clara reached her car, parked along the side of the road. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking as she unlocked the door and jumped inside. Slamming the door behind her, she took a moment to catch her breath, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. As she drove away, she stole one last glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the cabin vanish into the trees. But it was still there, an ominous silhouette against the backdrop of the night, a silent witness to her escape. She turned her gaze back to the road, determined to leave the horrors of the cabin behind her. Days turned into weeks, and Clara tried to resume her normal life. Yet the experience haunted her. The journal, the talismans, the shadow, memories that lingered like ghosts in her mind. Sleep eluded her, and she found herself unable to shake the feeling that something had followed her home. One evening, unable to rest, she decided to revisit the cabin in her thoughts. She pulled out her maps and notes, meticulously retracing her steps, but the unease only deepened as she realized she couldn't recall certain details of her escape. How had the shadow reached her? Why had it felt so familiar? Determined to find closure, Clara resolved to return to the cabin one last time. She prepared herself for the journey, gathering supplies and steeling her nerves for whatever awaited her. As she drove back to the Cascade Mountains, the familiar winding roads twisted with trepidation. Memories flooded back, and the anxiety bubbled beneath the surface. Arriving at the clearing, Clara parked her car and stepped out, the air heavy with expectation. The cabin stood silent, the atmosphere thick with unspoken words. She approached cautiously, heart pounding in her chest. As she entered, the air felt different, charged as if the cabin itself was alive and aware of her presence. She picked up the journal, feeling an undeniable connection to its author. Perhaps, she thought, understanding the past would help her make sense of her experience. She flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing the familiar scrawls. But as she read, a new entry caught her eye, one that hadn't been there before. It spoke of a traveler who had entered the cabin after hearing whispers in the woods, much like Clara. The entry described a profound connection, a sense of belonging that drew the writer in. But it took a dark turn, detailing the gradual transformation from curiosity to obsession. The author wrote of a figure that watched from the shadows, a figure that had once been a part of their life, and how it grew stronger each time a new soul entered the cabin. Clara's heart raced as she processed the words. The figure was no mere shadow, it was a spirit bound to the cabin, feeding off the energy of those who sought it out. And as Clara pieced together the remnants of the previous writer's story, a chilling realization dawned on her. She had become part of the cabin's narrative, just like those who had come before her. Suddenly, a rustle echoed from the loft, drawing Clara's attention. She felt an undeniable pull, an urge to confront whatever lay hidden in the shadows above. She climbed the stairs, each step heavy with apprehension. The air grew colder, and the sensation of being watched intensified. She reached the loft, her heart racing as she scanned the dim space. Then she saw it, a figure standing by the window, its back turned to her. Clara felt her breath hitch in her throat. It was the silhouette of a woman, draped in tattered garments, her hair wild and unkempt. The moment Clara stepped forward, the figure turned and Clara gasped. It was her own reflection, twisted and distorted, eyes darkened and hollow. The woman's face mirrored Clara's, but with an otherworldly sheen that sent chills racing down her spine. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. This was the spirit of the cabin, and it was a part of her now. Panic surged through Clara as she stumbled backward, realizing that she had unwittingly become a vessel for the cabin's energy. The journal had been a trap, drawing her deeper into its web. As the figure advanced toward her, Clara felt the cabin's darkness enveloping her, the walls pulsating with a life of their own. With every ounce of strength, Clara turned and fled down the stairs, the shadows closing in around her. She burst out of the cabin and ran into the woods, the trees whispering in a language she could not understand. The world around her twisted, branches reaching out as if to ensnare her. Clara dashed through the underbrush, desperation fueling her flight. But the presence was relentless, pursuing her with a determination that made the air feel thick with dread. She could feel its breath on her neck, the chill of the cabin's spirit entwined with her very essence. As she broke free from the trees and stumbled into the clearing, Clara spotted her car in the distance. Hope surged within her, and she sprinted toward it, but the shadows clawed at her heels. She fumbled with her keys, her fingers slick with sweat and fear as she frantically tried to unlock the door. Just as she managed to swing the door open, a shadow enveloped her, and she felt a cold grip seize her heart. In that moment of despair, Clara remembered the wooden idol, the one she had found in the trunk. It had felt alive, pulsating with energy. Perhaps it could help her break the hold of the cabin. With her heart racing, she grasped the idol that now lay heavy in her backpack. As the darkness closed in, Clara raised the idol high, channeling her will and determination into it. The shadows recoiled, a shriek echoing through the woods as light burst forth from the idol, illuminating the clearing. The spirit paused, its form flickering as the light surged, and for a fleeting moment Clara felt a connection, a flicker of recognition. The spirit, once a reflection of her fears, now looked lost, almost pleading. It was not a monster, but a soul trapped within the cabin's grasp, much like Clara had been. With newfound clarity, Clara focused on the light, pouring her intent into it. She was not just trying to escape. She was trying to free both herself and the spirit bound to the cabin. The light expanded, enveloping the spirit, drawing it closer as it began to dissolve into the brilliance. In that moment, Clara understood. The cabin's power stemmed from the souls it consumed, and in releasing the spirit, she would reclaim her own freedom. As the last remnants of darkness fell away, Clara felt the weight lift from her chest. The cabin's hold shattered, leaving behind nothing but echoes of the past. The spirit dissolved into the light, and Clara fell to her knees, breathless but liberated. She scrambled to her feet and dashed toward her car, the shadows retreating into the depths of the forest. Clara drove away, leaving the lost cabin behind her, but the experience remained etched in her mind. The cabin was not just a relic of history, it was a reminder of the thin line between curiosity and obsession, between light and darkness. In the weeks that followed, Clara reflected on her adventure, knowing that she had escaped not just the cabin, but a part of herself that had yearned for answers. The forest remained an enchanted place, filled with stories waiting to be discovered, but she would tread carefully, ever aware of the shadows that lurked just beyond the trees. And so the lost cabin stood silent in the heart of the Cascade Mountains, a testament to the souls it had claimed, but also a symbol of resilience for those who dared to seek the truth, knowing that sometimes the most profound journeys lead us back to ourselves.